pathetic. She has written, how many books, Jane? 16 books that she's published. And Things That I Do in the Dark is a very fine book. She's also the director of the Poetry Center here at Stony Brook, which is why the Poetry Center has seemed to come alive this year. Poetry Center's been dead for a long time, began to stink, and so they cleaned it out, and they put, June Jordan in there. So without further ado, we're going to talk about American poetics and Afro-American poetry, and they're also going to read some of their own works. We'll begin with Professor Harris.
Okay, so what I want to do is talk a little, then read two of my poems, and conclude with a short section from Ishmael Reed's one of his earlier novels called The Jumbo. Okay, and first I want to talk about my understanding the title of the talk, our discussion, is American Poetics and Black Poetry. And I'd like to keep it that way, even though the newspaper printed the other way, because there is a sense of, there's this large thing, certain tendencies, which are the way that American poems have existed. And the American poetics, which means white poetics, because it's the dominant poetics in the culture, influences all the poetry created in the culture. And poetics means, what a poem's going to look like, what a poem is going to contain. It works from individual and powerful poets, but it shapes everybody in the culture. And there have been, by various institutions, poetics define, how people are going to make poems. You have poetics which are larger, the sort of theoretical thing about what a poem is going to be. And what you have is, this white poetics, which is made up of a lot of poets, which has dominated what a poem is going to be. So when you sit down, you're going to start to write a poem, you have to face that poetics. And the poetics is moved from the abstract to the particular by being particular poets. So you say, who was a great American poet, and there'll be a pantheon. And this pantheon at this point is changing, is shifting, but it's still primarily white, it's still primarily male. So when you start to write and you want to make a poem, you have to respond to that pantheon. You have to respond to that dominant culture. And as a minority poet or somebody who doesn't share the dominant voice, you have to deal with it. You have to overcome the dominance. You have to find your own voice. And there are a variety of ways that this happens. I mean, it becomes a complicated issue in that you have a poet, let's say a contemporary poet, a good contemporary poet like Allen Ginsberg, who has changed the direction of American poetry a great deal, who has created poems which are anti-establishment poems, poems which are written very much in American voices. And you have poets within the white poetics, such as William Carlos Williams, who are saying things like, you got to write poems in America. You have to write poems not in British. You have to write poems in the language of your country. So you have Williams, who's the older poet, providing, an example, a positive example in the white community for poets who aren't necessarily white. And so something happens as you have a poet come along. Let's say a poet like Amiri Baraka, a poet who knows fairly well. And what happens is a poet like Baraka, or Baraka in particular, finds William Carlos Williams and finds that it's useful to write in the American language, to use the language of how people talk in the street. Williams talked about the voice of inarticulate Poles, the people who lived around him, to take that voice and to make it into poetry. So something that happens is a poet, an Afro-American poet like Baraka, will take that voice and will expand it and say, I will not, I will write in American, but I will write in Afro-American, and I will utilize Afro-American forms. So that's a useful using of American poetics, because you find what's useful in that tradition and you take it and you make it yours. There's a complication about making other things yours. There are certain poetics which are just totally alien to you, which you cannot take over. And another way to escape, the American poetic model is to draw on models from within your tradition. And in terms of Afro-American literature, it was very useful for a poet, once again, like Baraka, to draw on the most sophisticated model existing in that tradition. And that model is the jazz model. And take people like John Coltrane, who was an important artist, and take what he does with music and transform it to what you are doing as a poet. So you have, to quote from Baraka has written on black music, has written wonderfully black music, and there's this one sentence of his I want to quote to you on John Coltrane, and of course the famous jazz saxophonist, tenor saxophonist. Train is a mature swan whose wingspan was a whole world. And so you have the idea of someone who is a great artist who can encompass the whole world. But he also shows us how to murder the popular song, to do away with weak Western forms. So one thing that Baraka and that artist have learned from the jazz tradition is to take white forms, to invert them, to make them their own, to turn them over. Okay, so something that's always happening with the minority artist, with the black artist, the artist I know is he or she has to deal with the dominant culture, and reshape it into his or her image. And it's always a tension, it's always complicated, it's Afro-American, which means it's not just, it's just not that we are blacks in America. It's an experience which is created about being in America. We speak, as someone has said, we speak a mulatto language. We are a creation of the New World. But there is always the tension and the concern of the proper way of speaking, the proper language. And if you're speaking your own language, you're breaking away from that proper language. So there's always that tension of dealing with the dominant language. And it must be dealt with because it's there. It is shaping your vision of the world, and you have to rebel against this shaping. Okay, so I'm going to read two poems which sort of deal with this question. One is called We Western People, and it's written, no, I'll read that second. I'll read Caliban Sings. And Caliban Sings is a poem written in the character of Caliban from Shakespeare's The Tempest. And Caliban can be very much characterized as the native, as the person who is being colonized by Prospero. This is a reading I came to by myself of the play, but it's also a reading which is very popular in the West Indies. Taking Shakespeare's play, that's once again taking the image of Caliban, who was supposed to be the savage, and making him the hero of play, and taking Prospero, who was supposed to be the hero, who was sort of the white landlord of the island, and making him into the colonial force, making him into the enemy. Okay, and what Prospero does in the play is he teaches Caliban to speak, and what that means, he teaches Caliban to speak English, to speak the standard language. Caliban sings. I do not want your words. It is more elegant to curse you with my animal cries than speak your pale language. It was cruel of you to teach me your tongue, to poison me with your words. It is better to me to be a wild animal than to be your subject. Let me be a verb, my own being. My action will be deaf to your pallid words. I want to stop your words, stop your snow-white language from freezing me to death. Okay. This is from my second book, In My Own Dark Way. And it's a poem called We Western People, and it's to embody. I think I'll read two poems from here. It's to embody the sort of the Western worldview. So the white West is speaking in the poem. We Western people. We are the straight line people. We hate crooked. We talk about crooked behind his back. We hide crooked's shoes. We send secret agents out to get crooked. You can tell when we've been somewhere, we Western people. We put everything in order. Our roads are extensions of our being. Our roads grid nature. We are a grid people. We cube nature. We hate nature. We don't even like the color green. Okay, and there's another poem called The Western Philosopher. And you know, these are all poems in tension with the tradition. The Western Philosopher. He shits and doesn't even notice it. He has his mind on the stars. Warning, don't let him sit on your head.
There's some more chairs back there.
Okay, so I was going to do a longer thing.
Let us move this table first so these people can see.
Oh, sure.
Just move the table out in the hallway. That's all right. Just modeling on it.
Pass them chairs up.
You just put the chair in the way. We were talking about putting the chair in the way. Is that all the chairs there? Are they all out? Huh? There are more? Okay, well, never mind. We'll wait till somebody comes. Go ahead, Dave.
Okay. All right. It's snowing and things, so I was going to read this long section from Ishmael Reed's Mumble Jumble, published in 1972. Now, I'm just going to read you one page from it, and I'll set up the situation quickly. What happened is there is this group called the Motherfuckers, which is really the motherfuckers. This is a group of people who are trying to steal back art which has been stolen from non-Western peoples, which has been put in art museums. In the scene, there is a guy named Biff Musselwhite, who is the curator of the New York Center of Art Detention. And what he is, he's defending the Western tradition, and he is, he's the guy who's in charge of keeping all this art which has been stolen from other cultures. The Motherfuckers is an organization which is multi-ethnic and includes Chinese, blacks, and I've forgotten. There's one boy in it named Thor Wintergreen, who is obviously white Nordic. And what happens during this scene, and this is the climax of the scene, Musselwhite is trying to explain to Thor the errors of his ways to going off with those darker races and trying to steal this art back. And this is a defense of Western civilization. And how this fits in is, this is comic, but it's true. And what happens in these boardrooms when they're giving out grants in New York is these people are really thinking these things, whether they're saying them or not. But so Reed comes out and satirizes him. So he's told him so far about the glories of Western civilization. And poor Thor is weakening, and by the end of the scene, he gives up. So this is Musselwhite, the curator, speaking, and this is just one page. Son, and he's afraid about. There's something called Just Grew, and Just Grew is sort of spontaneous forces of dance and blackness and spontaneity, which is creeping through the country. This novel takes place in the 20s. Son, this is nigger. This is a nigger closing in our mysteries. And soon he'll be asking our civilization to come quietly. This man is talking about Judeo-Christian culture, the most noteworthy achievement anyone anywhere in the whole universe has created. His head in his hands, Musselwhite begins to cry quietly. Sob quietly. Stop it, Thor says, pacing the room nervously. I've seen them, son, in Africa and China. They're not like us. The master race. Europe, this place, they are lagging behind us, son. And you know in your heart this is true. Son, these niggers writing, profaning our sacred words, taking them from us, and beating them on the anvil of boogie-woogie, putting their black hands on them so they shine like burnished amulets. Taking our words, son, these filthy niggers, and using them like they were their God-given pussy. Why, one of them dared to interpret, critically, mind you, the great Herman Melville's Moby Dick. Stop it. Thor sits down on the bench and begins to cry. Musselwhite, seeing he's made a dent, continues. That's what it's coming down to, son. They're the ones who must change, not us. They must adopt our ways, producing Elizabethan poets. They should have Stravinsky's and Mozart's in the wings. They must become civilized. Slower, crying, continues to sit at the table. Musselwhite, softly, gently, son, come and untie me, son. And together, my young valiant prince, we'll do battle with the dragons of Justford. Okay. Thank you.
Stand up because I don't like sitting down. One thing, I can't see y'all. I'm sitting down. Well, we're talking about poetics in general, necessarily talking about poets, and so you know you're talking about people who are really very much individual, individualistic. That's the idea. This poet is unmistakable compared to the other one. So when I'm talking about Afro-American poetics against American poetics, I'm necessarily generalizing, which means you can find a lot of exceptions to whatever I'm going to say. And I'm aware of that. I just wanted you to know that. Yeah. But I want to speak of the generality because Amiri asked us to today. I think that there's something we can identify as distinctively black poetry. That does not mean that every black poet will always write in that way by any means. And it doesn't mean that a white poet will not write in a distinctively black form of poetry. As a matter of fact, since the 60s, many white poets, men and women both, American and international, have taken, borrowed, stolen, depending on your point of view, from the aesthetic of black poetry and used it. And so sometimes, for example, with a poet like Susan Griffin, who is a white poet in California, you may think you're reading a black poet, and you're not. You're reading a white poet who has read black poetry. You know what I'm saying? So that there is that interblur, which will necessarily happen because of the country we live in and the mixed life experience of all of us. Nonetheless, there are some distinguishing characteristics that generally hold. Last night, Louis Simpson at the Poetry Center, he's a very much awarded white male poet in this country. He read there, and one of the things he said was, in the course of the reading was, I make a lot of this up, meaning his poetry. And to generalize, okay, generally speaking, only a white poet would say something like that. Because, generally speaking, black poets feel that it is our responsibility to tell the truth to the extent that we are able. To tell the truth and to let the poem be the truth. Because generally speaking, black poets, we recognize that we have a political obligation to our people. And that means that we have to, as best we can, represent the truth of our people on every and any issue that we undertake to speak on. You know what I'm saying? So, whereas Louis Simpson could say that and there was no stir at all, all right? And there shouldn't be in a sense, because the tradition he represents. I submit to you, in general, that, let me put it this way, if a black poet said that, I would be very surprised. At the same time, again, I'm talking generally, there are black poets who do make things up. It's not necessarily malevolent, but they do. But when they do that, what I'm saying is they're not working within the distinctively black mode of poetry, okay? Now, the way that I learned about the kind of poetry that I write, that is part of the distinctively black poetry mode, was not from William Carlos Williams, although I had been writing 15 years when another white poet, David Ignato, said to me, you must have been very much influenced by William Carlos Williams. I said, I never read him. So, but rather because I was a poet in the 60s, and that meant, and what that meant for me, which is something that it meant for most of us who were black poets in the 60s, which is that we had to test our work and prove our work on the streets. You know what I mean? And that meant that that meant several things, and many of our fundamental criteria for what I call the distinctively black poem came out of that experience. It meant that whatever you did, it had to hit right away, it had to be accessible, people had to know what you're talking about, where you were coming from, where you wanted to go, all right? And on the basis of that, they either stayed there or they walked away. You know, and it was like that, or worse. You know, I mean, it was a really rugged situation. I think the most valid and kind of testing ground, really. I mean, we're talking really about a people's poetry, if you see what I'm saying. So first thing, it had to be accessible. People had to know what you were saying. It had to be clear. It could not be obscure or elitist. The second thing was that it had to serve some obvious purpose. All right? It could not be, in general, no one for sure, no black poet in the 60s or subsequently, in a situation on the street, is going to stand up and read a confessional short poem about how I didn't feel good or somebody broke my heart. You know what I mean? It's not about that. It has to be a poem that is big enough to involve all the people who may be listening to it, right? And the assumption was that if you want all these different people to listen to you, then your poetry has to be about all these different people who are standing there. Otherwise, it's not going to happen, all right? So that meant purpose, and that meant political purpose, right? Because many people coming together for the same reason. We're talking politics, all right? And so that was understood. The third thing is rhythm. Now, throughout the tradition of white poetry or Western poetry, there is something called meter, and what that means is you take a line of poetry and you analyze it for its rhythm this way. They go like this, you know, they make these marks, stressed syllables and unstressed syllables and like that. But what happened in the 60s particularly, which Billy Joel is referring to as jazz, I would reject that. I think it had something else. It has another origin, and it has an independence of its own, which is intrinsically verbal. It's a vertical rhythm that many of us had to develop, because what it meant was, what a vertical rhythm does is this. It means that if you can pull it together, it means that your vertical rhythm will pull the reader or the listener not only to the end of the line, but to the next line, you know what I mean, and through the poem. And so that was a way to hold people on the corner. See what I'm saying? So it came out of a social, a physical situation, this kind of an aesthetic requirement. It is not easy to do, but it's something that people had to try and do. And it's something that people who are not black poets have undertaken to master or mistress or whatever and make their own. It's very compelling and it's very difficult to analyze, but what you know is when it's not there. You know when it's there, you know when it's not there. Why it's happening when it's happening is a little bit of a different thing to try and articulate clearly, but I'm going to give you some examples in a moment. So we're talking about vertical rhythm, and to go back to the first couple of criteria I gave you for distinctively black mode of poetry, I think you will understand immediately that if we're talking about a political poetry, all right, a poetry that has to catch people immediately, because it's tested right away, right there, we're talking about a kind of poetry which is going to use a language which is daily. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's not, in any sense, the language is not going to differ, apparently. It will differ, in fact, but it will not differ, apparently, from the language that you use ordinarily in talking with each other. All right? Okay. So, as a result of those criteria that I give you, those main criteria, I think, of what I call the distinctively black poem, we have a body of literature now accessible to us and ongoing that all of us are contributing towards, which is powerful like very little else in the world. I mean, and it is emphatically musical. Emphatically musical. But they're different kinds of music. I mean, it can be diddy bop, it doesn't only have to be jazz, for example. It can be reggae, you know what I'm saying? But it is musical. But it's not necessarily coming out of a subjugation of the word to the music, but rather the fact that we are people who are very much musical by culture. I mean, our commitment is to our music, and that commitment and that environment of music will necessarily affect how we think about things in words. Right? And I can give you some examples. In the early 60s, I was asked to wrap up, they said, the first national conference of black women, which was held at Radcliffe College, and I decided, of course, to do it as a poet, and I couldn't get it together, and this is what I finally came up with. This is how it starts. And I came up with this, and this is what I'm saying. This is distinctively black, and it was a breakthrough for me. And I know the process until I know what I'm saying is true. It goes like this: mama, 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 mama. And when I got that, I just walked around the house. Okay. And the rest of the poem did not exist, but I was not worried because I had my music. Do you know what I'm saying? It was there. The structure was there. And we're talking vertical structure now, right? Mama, 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 mama. You can't stop it. You know, it's just going on and on, you know. So I just read you the first section of this poem called Getting Down to Get Over, which is published in Essence. You may have seen it. Mama, 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 mammy, nanny, granny, woman, mistress, sister, love, black girl, slave girl, gal, honey child, sweet stuff, sugar, sweetheart, baby, baby, baby. All right? The diction is ours, it's daily. The rhythm is unmistakable. It's, you know, it's vertical. It's political. It's not my mother. It's mama, mama. I mean, so you know what I'm saying? It's, because that's what it was about. It was a national conference of black women. That's an example. Now, by contrast, I just got in the mail today a very distinguished contemporary white woman poet, Sharon Olds, her most recent book, and I just read you the first couple of lines from her poem, the first poem in this book. By the end of the longest day of the year, he could not stand it. He went up the iron stairs through the roof of the building and over the soft, tarry surface. Who is he? You know, I mean, do I care? Do we care? I mean, what I'm saying is this is a very different aesthetic. Do you hear it? I mean, it's like if she tried that on the street, she would be in trouble. You know what I mean? It's like, you know, this is not a street poem. I'm not saying it's not a good poem. I'm saying it's not a poem for the street. You know what I'm saying? That's what I'm saying. That's the kind of difference. And when I say street, I don't mean anything pejorative at all. I'm talking about public, real, and varied. That's what I'm talking about. Random. You can't control who's in the street. That's what I mean. Okay, now, in contrast to any anthology of so-called contemporary American poetry that you will find, and check them out anytime you want to, and I think you should want to, anything published since 1960, you'll be astounded if they have any black poets in that whole anthology. It'll maybe be one or two. That's the book. Look at the poems that are in there and contrast them with this anthology, which is an issue, a special double issue of Icon magazine, which is put out by Art Against Apartheid. Okay. Now, in this anthology, there are white poets as well as black poets. There are American poets as well as South African poets as well as Afro-American poets. And what you will find is, because the context is art against apartheid, all right, despite the diversity of the poets included here, there's a similarity of craft, all right, that commits the overwhelming majority of the poems that you can find in here to what I call the mode of the distinctively black poem, all right? And if you don't know this anthology, I urge you to try and find your way to a copy of it. It's very powerful, very gorgeous work, and both Amiri and myself are represented in here, and it's important. And Art Against Apartheid, by the way, is an organization that essentially is founded by young artists, and you know, it's being maintained by them. They're doing great work and raising lots and lots of money for the ANC. Okay, I think what I will do is to conclude with a poem you may know. It's a lot of people, it's my poem, but a lot of people read it. Sometimes with attribution, sometimes not. And this is, I submit to you, a poem in the mode of the distinctively black poem. And I also want to read it now because Amiri has dedicated this Black History Month to death against apartheid. And I wrote this some time ago. This is called Poem About My Rights. Even tonight, and I need to take a walk and clear my head about this poem, about why I can't go out without changing my clothes, my shoes, my body posture, my gender identity, my age, my status as a woman, alone in the evening, alone on the streets, alone not being the point being that I can't do what I want to do with my own body because I am the wrong sex, the wrong age, the wrong skin, and suppose it was not here in the city, but down on the beach or far into the woods, and I wanted to go there by myself, thinking about God, or thinking about children, or thinking about the world, all of it disclosed by the stars and the silence. I could not go, and I could not think, and I could not stay there alone as I need to be alone, because I can't do what I want to do with my own body, and who in the hell set things up like this? And in France they say, if the guy penetrates but does not ejaculate, then he did not rape me, and if after stabbing him, if after screams, if after begging the bastard, and if even after smashing a hammer to his head, if even after that, if he and his buddies fucked me after that, then I consented and there was no rape, because finally, you understand, finally they fucked me over because I was wrong. I was wrong again to be me, being me where I was, wrong to be who I am, which is exactly like South Africa penetrating into Namibia, penetrating into Angola. And does that mean, how do you know if Pretoria ejaculates? What will the evidence look like? The proof of the monster jackboot ejaculation on black land. And if after Namibia, and if after Angola, and if after Zimbabwe, and if after all of my kinsmen and women resist even to self-immolation of the villages, and if after that we lose nevertheless, what will the big boys say? Will they claim my consent? Do you follow me? We are the wrong people of the wrong skin on the wrong continent, and what in the hell is everybody being reasonable about? And according to the Times this week, back in 1966, the CIA decided that they had this problem, and the problem was a man named Nkrumah, so they killed him. And before that, it was Patrice Lumumba, and before that, it was my father on the campus of my Ivy League school, and my father afraid to walk into the cafeteria because he said he was wrong, the wrong age, the wrong skin, the wrong gender identity, and he was paying my tuition. And before that, it was my father saying I was wrong, saying that I should have been a boy because he wanted one, a boy, and that I should have been lighter skinned, and that I should have had straighter hair, and that I should not be so boy crazy, but instead I should just be one, a boy. And before that, it was my mother pleading plastic surgery for my nose and braces for my teeth, and telling me to let the books loose, to let them loose. In other words, I am very familiar with the problems of the CIA, and the problems of South Africa, and the problems of Exxon Corporation, and the problems of white America in general, and the problems of the teachers and the preachers and the FBI and the social workers and my particular mom and dad. I am very familiar with the problems because the problems turn out to be me. I am the history of rape. I am the history of the rejection of who I am. I am the history of the terrorized incarceration of myself. I am the history of battery, assault, and limitless armies against whatever I want to do with my mind and my body and my soul. And whether it's about walking out at night, or whether it's about the love that I feel, or whether it's about the sanctity of my vagina, or the sanctity of my national boundaries, or the sanctity of my leaders, or the sanctity of each and every desire that I know from my personal idiosyncratic and indisputably single and singular heart, I have been raped because I have been wrong, the wrong sex, the wrong age, the wrong skin, the wrong nose, the wrong hair, the wrong need, the wrong dream, the wrong geographic, the wrong sartorial. I have been the meaning of rape. I have been the problem everyone seeks to eliminate by forced penetration with or without the evidence of slime. And but let this be unmistakable. This poem is not consent. I do not consent to my mother, to my father, to the teachers, to the FBI, to South Africa, to Bedford-Stuy, to Park Avenue, to American Airlines, to the hard-on idols on the corners, to the sneaky creeps in cars. I am not wrong. Wrong is not my name. My name is my own, my own, my own. And I can't tell you who the hell set things up like this, but I can tell you that from now on, my resistance, my simple and daily and nightly self-determination may very well cost you your life.
Engage these professors in some dialogue. It has to be, sharp and concise because it's snowing and they're all New Yorkers. So we got to get out of here. But please, if you have any questions, go ahead.
Yes, Professor Harris, you said that most of the forums like what black poets are writing today, it comes from a reflection of white poetics and things like that. I kind of
No.
Not you didn't say that exactly, but he was implying
No,
that.
I'm not saying it at all. There is a reaction, there's this thing that exists, and it has to be responded to, which doesn't mean, you know.
Oh, you mean the thing what exists? Are you talking about like society that exists?
I'm
and
talking
has to be
about
responded to?
images which are created in society, and those images are there and they're dominant and they have to be dealt with.
So you're not saying anything about white poetic being the first form, and black poets have to take their form from white?
No, never. No, I'm not.
Because in a way you're saying, I don't know.
No, I'm not. I really am not.
Ask another question.
Yeah.
Go ahead. You stop. No, you finish your question.
Oh,
Ask him
but
something close to that. Then that wasn't it.
what I was trying to get is that,
Uh-huh.
are you saying that there's, in other words, you're saying that there is distinctively black poet?
Yeah,
Okay.
there is.
Because when you first started off, you was leading to, I don't know if you were saying it directly, but the picture that I got was that you're saying that all black poetic forms come
No.
from a white poetic
No.
image.
No, I'm saying
Who they make
there
up the
is an
majority.
interaction, and that white poetic has to be dealt with because you're existing in this world. But that doesn't mean there aren't, you know, black forms.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to comment on it. I think I also misunderstood you earlier, because I thought that was what you were saying. I feel that, I think it's very important to be clear. For one thing, you used the term minority poets, and I just want to comment on that. We are not minority poets. You know, I mean, non-white poets in this country really are part of the majority peoples of the world, and the forms that are available to us, and also the forms that we are ourselves evolving, you know, are just myriad, you know, just infinite. And I think that what I was trying to demonstrate, and what I was presenting to you, is that in fact we have come up with a lot of things that other people are now using. You know what I mean? They've taken from us. I'm not denying that there is an intercourse, if you will, a cultural intercourse going on. I wouldn't deny that, but I'm saying to use the words dominant and then minority, I think for me is to mistake the case. I think that what is dominant about what we can call traditional white poetics in this country that we do have to deal with absolutely is the fact that poetics and that establishment is opposed to the publication of and the circulation of anything that is different from it. You know what I mean? Anything that is different from it is not judged as different from it, but rather deficient, because it is different. You know, that's what happens. I mean, there's something that's published in this country called the American Poetry Review. And the poetry that is in there, if it is not the poetry coming out of a particular school of poetry, which is the University of Iowa, okay,
Corny.
it's not in there. You know what I'm saying? But they don't say our American Poetry Review. They say the American Poetry. I mean, you know, and I'm just suggesting you have to be aware of that and watchful and if possible, organized to overcome that hegemony.
One more question. I remember last year, Mr. Jordan, that you had on your office something about national poetry competition. Is that also a form of Western or, you know, competition? Because I submitted several poems to it and I really didn't get none. But I was just wondering if it was just, you know, based upon white Western, you know, poetry, which is judges, or is just.
Well, I didn't know whether you were asking whether competition is a Western phenomenon or not.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm trying to ask. I'm trying to ask, is inside the people who judge the poems of national competition, do they have people that recognize
You're saying
black
that doesn't
form
make
of
any
poetry?
sense for you to submit it.
Yeah, well, I think it depends. I mean, it's for example, there's something called, there's a major fellowship in this country, literary fellowship, called the Guggenheim. And in my opinion, it's a waste of time if you're a political writer of any sort. And particularly if you're a political black or Hispanic or Asian writer.
It's a waste of time.
It's a waste of time to go through that process. The Guggenheim, for example. With the NEA, I mean, it depends on who the judges are, always. There was one year, for instance, there was one year when everybody who won the NEA was, you remember this, Samir? Was either, it was like Allen Ginsberg and his lover, and then
Yeah, right.
everybody and his lover
Everybody who had slept with a red.
all got the NEA, and there was such a scandal about it, you know. Everybody said, wow, you know, it's like, and they all kind of lived at St. Mark's in the Church of the Bowery, and, you know, it's like, it's amazing. And there was enough of a scandal because the NEA is national money, you know, we're
That's
talking
right.
public money, that the next year, everybody who applied who was not white got one. It was
That's when I
like,
got one.
right, it was like, I mean, everybody was on the phone, you were having a conference calls, you got one, I got one, you know, it was like that. It was amazing. So who the judges are absolutely has very much to do with it.
There was, you had your hand up, and there was somebody else? Was that?
Well, I'd like to just ask a question. It could be directed at either one of you. I've always been particularly interested in the poetry out of the 50s, 60s, and early 70s. I just want to know what you think of the poetry that's being produced now in the 70s, the 80s. You know, there is a different, I've seen, type of flair and meaning behind the poetry now. It seems sort of diluted, if I may use that word. The poetry that's being mass-produced, majority-produced, the poetry that most of the people in the colleges like Stony Brook get their hands on in a course. It doesn't seem to be too much of that poetry out of the 60s, some poetry you have recited earlier, June. I just want to know what you think of the poetry now, the scene.
Black poetry or poetry in general?
Well,
Or poetry getting classes. which
well,
is
see, I
another-
understand.
Yeah.
I understand that poetry in general has to do with, like what she said, the poetry that's just being recognized widely by such people, like NEW or whatever they're called. I'm talking about the poetry. It seems like I just don't see enough of it anymore. The type of poetry out of the 60s and 70s. I don't know. It might be a testimony of the people today.
Well, it depends very much. For example, there are, in New York City, there are regularly benefits for the people of Nicaragua, benefits for the ANC. I mean, in other words, clearly political situations. Now, they'll take a whole auditorium, like the auditorium of PS 41 in the village, something like that, and you have, you know, maybe 20, 30 poets reading. And most of the poems that you will hear there are political poems. You know, I mean, because people, that's the situation, that's the context, that's the purpose, and so forth, and you'll hear that. That doesn't mean that the majority of poets writing are doing that. It means that the poets who will want to commit themselves in that way against apartheid or against intervention in United States intervention in Nicaragua or anywhere else in the First World will be there, and that's the kind of poetry that they're writing. So, but that kind of poetry, generally speaking, you will certainly not find in the classroom. Generally speaking, you will not. And you will mostly find it published on a small press basis. Unfortunately, you will not find it in Essence magazine. If you ever look at what Essence is publishing, yeah, right, so, I mean, now there's an example where if you want to do something about something, you know, I mean, it can be done because they're very sensitive to letters. If you can say, I don't believe this drivel, you know, you're putting out here one month after another, they will respond, I mean, because it's insulting. I mean, I think a lot about Essence is insulting, but that, as a poet, I take particular offense to. You know, it's wasting people's time. It's the largest national black publication in the country. It has 4 million readership, okay, a month. Okay, we have the Klan, Ku Klux Klan all over this country. You know what I mean? These are very serious times, okay? And the kind of stuff that they put out that's supposed to be poetry, which is supposed to be, as I said before, about telling the truth and being the truth, is disgraceful.
Well, I think one thing is that they don't publish that, you know, like you won't see Stokely on TV these days. You know what I mean? They don't publish that. A lot of poets are not as published as widely as they were. You know. Let me ask you a question. Plus, Essence is owned by Playboy, which might count for that. I want to ask a question. In terms of American poetics, you know, how have we identified that in Afro-American poetry? What do you all see as the fundamental kind of conflict? I mean, if you could say, of all the things we summed up, what would you say is the fundamental conflict? The fundamental conflict let's say, in fundamental conflict between, say, American poetics and all that encompasses, and say Afro-American poetry as we, you know,
Yeah, well, so,
know or feel it or whatever.
well, one thing is, it's still, the power is in the hands, you know, of white America, and it's doing a lot of defining. So that's a central problem. And so it's a problem in terms of, I mean, June talks about it, it's true, there's a lot of wonderful stuff out there, but there's a problem with getting that wonderful stuff and getting it around.
But that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
What would you
Yeah.
say is the fundamental conflict between the
Well, one
American poetics, I mean, in terms of the aesthetic, and say Afro-American poetry? You're saying,
I think one thing which
what would be the basic kind of conflict?
I think there are basic conflicts. One thing is the poetry, and I agree with June, it tends to be very political. And the black poetry tends to be very political. Another thing is sort of like, you know, what's your sense of reality? And if your sense of reality is upper middle class white, it's going to reject a lot of things which aren't upper middle class white. So it's, you know, it's a problem of worldview. I think it's also a simple problem of what is not a simple problem of what is a poem. And if you have a sense of, you know, I think this has broken out, and I think, you know, writers like Ginsberg very much responsible for it. It's just breaking the idea of what a poem should be. But what's happening in these times is a much more conventional idea of a poem is coming back. Now, I mean, a poem is becoming, once again, this metered sort of not terribly interesting.
Well, for me, I think that the fundamental conflict is or difference between Afro-American poetics and American poetics is in the realm of purpose. I feel that for Afro-American poetics, as distinct from American poetics, that first of all, there has to be a purpose, you know, which is not true of American poetics. There has to be purpose, and there's a sense of obligation that the poet welcomes, and not only assumes, but welcomes, a responsibility. And I think that in American poetics, that simply doesn't exist. I mean, it's just a totally different way of approaching your work, you know, as somebody who deals in words. It's just very different. There's no sense of anybody else, let alone a collective anything, to which you're responsible or accountable. And whether you have a purpose or not is, I regularly teach poetry workshops both in the graduate and undergraduate level over here in the English department. And at the first session of every workshop, I lay down the guidelines, which I explain to them as the law for the semester. Just they call them guidelines, but I mean it's the law. And if you want to pass my course, you got to go with those guidelines for that semester. And the first thing I say is what's the purpose? And a lot of people have a lot of problem with that because no one else asks them that. It's like, you know, they don't deal with the poem like that. They just read it and say, oh, I like that, or I didn't like it. But I said, what is the purpose of this? And they say, you mean you got to have a purpose? But, you know, when you think about what kind of human beings we're talking about, it's like if you were walking down the street and you had no purpose, I mean, you know, it would be at least simple, right? I mean, you know, it's like, you know, people can write something without having anything in their minds, I mean, objective, and think that's perfectly okay. That is a fundamental difference, I think.
Other questions? Come on, some of you students, and especially you all in Pan-African literature. Blank. What do you all be talking about 24 hours in the dormitories?
Not soap opera.
That's the problem. That's the problem. Are any other questions? No?
I just
Go
like to comment upon Ms. Jordan's opening remarks. So what first thing she said was black Africans do have distinctive poetry. And not only do they have distinctive poetry, but a lot of their poetry are original forms, and you know, a lot of people take, you know, their ways of writing poetry from African form. You know, just like comment upon that. You know, I like that.
Can you see?
That's what I believe. You know.
Can you see, just as a parting shot, since a lot of people here are listening to rap and so forth, can you give them kind of a gloss on how you see the relationship, say, between rap and, say, the poetry that emerged in the 60s and early 70s? Either of you, can you give them, because maybe that will make poetry more relevant so they can see it related to the Fat Boys.
I like rap myself.
Me too, that's what I'm saying, I'm
I
trying to
like
get
it.
them to
I've written
understand that
quite
ain't
a
nothing
few
but a rap.
things in and I love DMC and so forth, but I think that the relationship is that we're talking about something that is inherently popular. I mean, it's written, it's designed to be popular, that's the test. You know what I mean? It's not, by the way, that's one way of putting it. In traditional American poetics, if something is very popular, it's no good by
No, it can't be
definition.
good if it's popular.
See what I mean? And if it's not popular and nobody knows what anyone's talking about or anything like that, then this is deep. This is deep. This is deep. You know? This is required reading. This is required reading. Okay, now what rap, rap again, the purpose is to be popular, is to merit a whole lot of people picking up on whatever it is you put together. You know what I'm saying? And the test is whether people will do it or not, and what they'll make of it. And the challenge for somebody who's working in that form is to use that form in a way to say whatever it is you want to say, you know what I mean? And not lose your popularity. Because popularity is not incidental to it. That's that's very crucial, and that's the point. And so, and that's a very good, that's a wonderful example, of a form that comes out of real life. I mean, I don't think William Carlos Williams, I'm not picking on him, it's just I never read him, and this guy told me I was really influenced by him. I thought, how could that happen? And when I have read him, what I have felt about him is that, I don't like his work, but apart from that, the thing is that he had a theory which was good, but I don't think that he was able to produce what the theory required. Just as there was an earlier poet who was really very, very, very important to all of American poetry, Walt Whitman, who had a theory which is fantastic. And the theory was a really democratic theory of poetry and art, and also of our country, which is fantastic. I mean that sincerely. But in his poetry, if you're really committed to a democratic country, meaning many different kinds of people, right, and a poetry that could render that, you have to have in your poetry many different voices. Right? Many different rhythms and so on. But he did not. The voice in Walt Whitman's poetry is always his voice. So, you can be democracy of one, right? But that's not as much of, that's not the, that's not the dream. That's not the undertaking. But you can pick up on a theory like that, as I have, for example, influenced by Whitman, and make it real.
I've always seen the value of Whitman as to get away from Europe, actually, sort of break fresh American ground, or whatever, that finally is worth. Yeah, go ahead.
First question to Professor Jordan. Have you published any poetry for like the upper elementary school level and junior high school level? Because I find that in my growing up, I was not exposed to black poetry until like later on in school, and I didn't even know that such a thing exists, really. I mean, I'm pretty sure that's not, true of everyone, but in my particular case, that was. And I think poetry is needed to, really reach us from young, as well as a lot of other black readings. But I'm saying that specifically because that sends out a message, but that also, it inspires, it inspires youth from young, Have you written anything in that?
Well, I've written a lot of children's books, actually. A lot of books for children, which are stories, however. But I did put together and put out an anthology of Afro-American poetry called Soul Script. And it's not only aimed specifically at young black people, but also it published the work of some young black people, including the sister of Eric.
Wasn't there a book for you, one called Who Looks at Me?
Right, and Who Look at Me is another one.
Me, yeah.
And there's another one I did, which also has Eric's sister in it, called The Voice of the Children. Yeah, you know what I mean? So it was not only for young black people, but also by, which is, let's make this very real. I wanted to pick up on something that Mary said, if I may. One of the poems about this getting away from Europe thing, that Mary just was talking about, Professor Baraka, the thing is that one of the poems that Louis Simpson read last night, which is very interesting to me, it's incredible. He read a poem about somebody, probably made up again, right? He said most of it's made up. But anyway, that this person had originally come from, or he dreamed, the poet, Louis Simpson dreamed that he'd come from someplace that's really exotic in South America, where he had a villa with lots of, tropical flowers and servants, and and all of this. And now this person that the poem was about was stuck somewhere in the middle of this country, looking out on a cornfield, looking out on cornfields. And I thought, well, there are a lot of problems with that. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is this thing about Europe is, and Europhilia is not over. I mean, Whitman lived like 300 years ago. So, I mean, a long time ago, a long, long time ago. And the problem is that we still have somebody who can get up in an American state university and say he wished that somebody was living somewhere in a villa outside the United States with servants, you know what I'm saying? But instead, no, this poor sucker, he's stuck in some place looking at a cornfield. I don't know if you've ever seen a cornfield. A cornfield is very beautiful. What was objectionable about the cornfield to this poet last night is that it's here. We're talking about very, really fierce self-hatred here. That's like, oh, what are you talking about? And the thing about the servants, I don't have to say.
Well, that's one of the things I see it as is the reality versus the non-reality. When you're saying, about the truth, that the American aesthetic always wants to incorporate what doesn't exist.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's always appalled by what does.
Mm-hmm.
If it exists, that's a sure way to get it put down. Go ahead.
Just on the children's anthology thing, there's a guy named Arnold Adolph, and he's published several anthologies, for young children. One's called I Am the Darker Brother, another one's called Black Out Loud. And they're just, they're available.
But that has to do with the curriculum. That has to do with curriculum. They do not want you to be in, a little black youth reading June Jordan or Billy Joe or you know what I'm saying? They don't want that because black poets are political. They are political. And they don't want you to read that because you will be politicized. And then you'll have something to say back to the teacher. And the teacher says something funny to you, you'll start quoting June and Billy Joe. They don't want that. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't happen in America, but when I was growing up in Jamaica, it was very popular. It was Barbecue, Nouveau Taki, Louise Bennett. It was all the stuff that came out of the Caribbean.
You said it was popular when?
It was
The
popular
people.
in school.
Oh, yeah.
The people who read poetry.
Yeah. They were all, most of them were black poets. As a matter of fact, I knew nothing about white poets.
Poetry is very popular. I mean, these people who say it's not popular don't know anything. Poetry is extremely popular, which is why rap is so popular. Which is why you all can quote all these lyrics of these songs and know the complete works of Michael Jackson and stuff like that.
What do you think? Do you think that is I mean, in the near future, will be a reversal of how American scholastic system, what it does to us coming up? Will there be a change, or can there be a change? Do you think it requires a revolution to a certain point, to a certain extent, of just trying to us coming together, just knocking down the whole educational system and trying to build it back up, or what would be the answer? Because with them in control, it seems like this whole thing will just perpetuate.
Well, I think a lot of people get scared by the word revolution. And my attitude about it is, why use it? Let's just talk about what you want to accomplish. You know what I mean? And I think that education is like the most political process, in a sense, that you have in any society. Do you know what I mean? Not only education takes place, say we're just talking now, or you talk to your brother, or you know what I mean, or parents and children, but what in our country is compulsory public school education. And why is this compulsory? I mean, there are a couple of reasons. One of them is political, because there's some stuff that we have to know in a certain way, and there's some other stuff that we're not supposed to know any kind of way. You know what I mean? So that's why it's compulsory. Now, there was a time during the 60s when education, public school education, compulsory public school education, was right in the center focus of political struggle. And unfortunately, a lot of people just fell away from that, just kind of like got tired or something. But that doesn't mean that our children are not still going to public school. You know what I mean? Or that the situation has improved, or that there is community control, or that there is curricular integrity. None of that has happened. And as a matter of fact, the dropout rates for young black people across this country are Holocaust levels. Holocaust level. And what I would suggest is that it's a good thing not to put the question out like that, because it's like passively. You're asking me as somebody else, what do we think? It's like, what do you want to do? You know, if you know what you want to do about it, and if I know what I want to do about it, and we can connect some kind of real place, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Then we do it together, and let somebody else say it's reform, it's revolutionary, because I don't care about those labels, you know. Do you know what I'm saying? Because that's not the point, and as I say, you lose a lot of people by labeling things. You know, they get scared, they don't even come to the meeting. You know what I mean?
You sound like don't give a label, just do what you feel is necessary.
Do it, yeah, let's get specific. What you talking about, you know?
Yeah, don't give a label.
See what I'm saying?
So you think in the next blast that whole thing will be taken up?
The next what?
The whole educational thing will be taken up? Because it wouldn't be lost as if like it was in the 60s.
Well, I'm hoping that it's going to be taken up sooner than that, because it's I mean, I'm not kidding. I mean, this is a Holocaust going
It is
on.
crazy.
This is not all right. I mean, the whole thing. Remember when Michael Griffiths was murdered, people were beside themselves because they said, this is a young black man that had a job. They said, wow, you know, we shouldn't have killed that one. You know what I mean? So he had a job. I mean, that was in the papers.
He's unemployed.
That was right. And that's directly tied, we're talking to education. During the Great Depression, you know, everybody knows about the Great Depression, the highest unemployment rate that you ever had was between 25 and 33%. Unemployment rates affecting young black people today are 40% and above. We're talking, that's when I say, I'm not kidding, I mean, this is murder. This is murder. And if it's news that a young black man has a job,
Yeah,
okay,
that's true.
this is not all right.
Okay, we're going to, you want to ask the last
No.
question, because we gotta. Sure.
Continue what Stress was saying. I was going to ask you, do you think one of the solutions, I know that already the black poets inside the African community are trying to reach the African audience. But what I'm saying, do you think one of the solutions is for us, you know, in the educational system to have our own schools and, you know, start working toward that direction so we can give our children the true, correct education? Truth about, you know.
I think alternative institutions of every sort are really something that we should always try to produce. One of the reasons why the civil rights movement did produce a revolution, it's over so we can say it now. If you said that, a lot of people wouldn't have come to church, right? Was because of the independence of the black church. You know what I mean? It's, you know, not as alternative institution, but it was an institution that was independent. And that meant, well, that was where the leadership was coming from, that's where the organizing was taking place, I mean, in many instances, do you know what I mean? And that would have everything to do with the connection between the black church and that revolution. So, I mean, you can look at that, right, and say, yeah, well, so obviously, independent, or I would say independent, if you want to say alternative, okay. You know what I mean? 'Cause I think we're talking about the same thing. I would say independent institutions for all facets of our lives are really essential.
Sure. Yes, go ahead.
Well, for many years, black women poets have been directing messages within their poems to black men. And I was just wondering if you could discuss a little bit about what those messages are that they
Well, poetry always reflects what's going on in the general society, you know, and what's encouraged to go on. And so when, in general, we were in tremendous tumult, you know, as far as the civil rights movement was concerned, that kind of empowerment, all of the poetry that black women and black men wrote was really essentially about that. And then there was the war in Vietnam, and then there was the women's movement. You know what I mean? Whatever's going on, that kind of consciousness will be reflected in the poetry. But I would just like to say something. I'm writing something right now on the black family that I'm going to deliver in Williams in 2 weeks. That will be published later this year in Essence. And I just want to say something. I think Essence is really at fault again here. You know, there's an insistence on the problem of relationship between black men and black women. That really, I mean, it's like it's to suggest that there isn't any problem between white men and white women, for example, which is, you know, and that that what we have as a black family is a problem, you know, my perspective is we have a triumph, historical, ongoing triumph. And I think that it's important to try and understand when we accept for ourselves images of ourselves that come from people who do not love us. Do you know what I mean? And what I'm saying can go all the way back to the early 1960s when something like Newsweek or Time magazine would publish an issue called The Negro Problem. Say, the Negro problem? We didn't have no problem. We were not the problem. You know what I'm saying? But if you accept that, if you internalize that, then you begin thinking of yourself as a problem, and it's natural to have difficulties in relationships. You know what I mean?
No, I didn't ask about a problem.
No, I know, but it's a tricky thing. Is if we begin thinking that we have particular problems or more problems than any other kind of people, we don't. I don't think so. Relationships between men and women per se are very fraught right now because of the changes that are taking place for women and men and throughout the world. Because there really is a revolution taking place of women's consciousness and function. And there are going to be all kinds of difficulties, and there already are. But the difficulties are not particular to black people, nor are they insurmountable, nor should they be surprising. It's always hard to hook it up with somebody else. It is never easy, okay? That's why when you get to your 50th anniversary, people make such a big deal out of it. It's like, surprise, you know? You're still speaking to each other, you know what I mean? It is never easy. You know, so I just try to put some perspective on it, but that what is being said in the poetry reflects what is our broader cultural preoccupations and the kinds of changes that we are broadly speaking going through. People in general are going through, which includes not only empowerment of third world or first world peoples, but also the empowerment of women throughout the world.
Okay, we're going to bring this to, let's see if Charles got her hand out. She wants to say. Billy Joe, did you want to say anything before closing? Because, okay, we're going to close it up. You had an announcement you want to make?
Yeah, tonight there's a few students, some students putting together a rally, and it's going to be held at Tabla. It's pretty publicized.
What time is that?
7 o'clock, if I'm not mistaken. You might want to look around. Look around. There's a lot of, what is it, 8 o'clock?
8 o'clock.
8 o'clock. And Tabla Cafeteria, the Cultural Center now. Okay.
Okay, remember Monday the 16th, 12 noon here. A never before seen videotape on Langston Hughes. 2 o'clock, the media and black liberation also here. And